were at the beginning pretty much of Stitcher, correct?
Yeah, so I was working at Alice Radio in San Francisco. I'd created the Sarah and No Name show, and I'd done radio my whole life, and I was like, hey, everybody's kind of going to startups, and these guys told me about this new startup, and it was podcast, and I'm like, what's a podcast? I have no idea what that is. And then, when I looked at what podcasts were versus where radio was going, it was like, well, this is a good switch to make, because I did talk radio, and that was going away. People didn't want to listen to, people do like listening to it, but the rating system, get into that whole thing, trying to change that whole thing. So I met with the CEO, Noah Shannock, and he explained to me, kind of what podcasts were and what they were trying to build. And I took the leap. I left, very good, as you guys know, very popular radio show, #1, to go join the team at Stitcher. And we were the first podcast app. In fact, our app came out before the iPhone. So I remember us going to, startup land when the iPhone came out, handing out leaflets to everybody in line, telling them, hey, download this new app called Stitcher and listen to podcasts. And of course, the answer to everybody was like, what the F's a podcast?
Exactly. Exactly. So let's slow down this whole podcast story a little bit. So you're out there, you're trying to explain to people what podcasting is. And then it seemed to have hit very quickly, I should say, kind of this, everyone knows what podcasting is. And it reminds me a little bit of streaming. If we want to talk about TV, right? It's like, I need to download an app to watch a show that's only on the app. So kind of explain that transition that's been made from traditional radio to podcasting.
Well, technology always drives it. So the easier it got to listen to, the easier it was for that. And then it was a matter of content. I mean, our first shows on Stitcher were all about Mac computers, because that's who was listening to podcasts. And they were like 2 hours long. And then, we made our first content deal with NPR. And NPR was the first traditional media company to say, listen, we're going to get into this podcasting game. And all of their stations were like, no, it'll hurt our ratings. It'll hurt our ratings. And it did just the opposite. It really uplifted the shows on NPR to the point where, I have students that tell me they like this podcast, This American Life. I'm like, do you know that's a radio show? And they're like,
right.
What's a radio?
Don't say it, Matty. Oh my God.
But when I got into when I left radio, I mean, for the first 6 years, everybody was like, what are you doing? Why are you doing? And I was asking myself the same question, because we just didn't have that moment we thought we would have. And then Serial came out, and that kind of changed a lot for us, because it really became the first, what I called water cooler podcast, where like I would go somewhere and start talking about it, and somebody would walk in the room and say, stop. I haven't heard the latest episode. And that was the first time I'd ever experienced that.
Yeah.
And it was like, I remember that moment and going, I think we're getting somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Serial. I had those moments with one of my old colleagues, and we would come in. I was like, "It's on." She's like, "Don't talk about it yet." And I mean, even the Anand Syed story is still going. It makes traditional news. I mean, people know about Serial, the first one, and that kind of storybook type of podcast. What do you think were the highs with Stitcher specifically? Did they, obviously they were before the iPhone, like you just said. So you would think that they would have held that market share and continued to be a leader, but they were sold to SiriusXM a few years ago. So kind of lay out what happened to Stitcher.
There were several sales before that. So the first sale was to a company called Deezer, and that's where it was basically an acquisition, which wasn't fun for those of us that had like stock, because we didn't really get anything. And then Scripps bought it, and Scripps was smart. They bought that and Earwolf and combined the two, because my vision for Stitcher was always to be content driven and make content, but we were kind of a tech company. That's why I left after 3 years and then shifted into just making podcasts. Scripps put the two together and really built something really cool, and it became more of a content company than an app. So the focus became more on the content that they were making. Now, I'm very familiar with SiriusXM and the folks there. A lot of the folks that I worked with in talk radio, we went to Sirius or we went to podcasts. So Sirius buys Stitcher, but they also have Pandora, which, by the way, 16 years ago, we were always telling Tim Westergren, we should combine forces and have podcasts and Pandora be together. But they have 3 apps now, and it's very confusing. So the fact that the brand is going away, it hurts, but the people are still there. They're not firing anybody. I see these doom and gloom headlines all the time.
I know. I saw your tweet about it, and you're like, this is a stupid headline.
Well, the industry is fine. It's just, those of us that know what we're doing saw by the last 3 or 4 years that all these companies were overspending on talent that they would never make back on the podcast. So now they're scaling back, and that's good for the industry, and to get downsized a little bit as far as where the money's going. Hopefully the money starts going to independent podcasters a little bit more, back to what it used to be.
When you say the money is going to kind of these creators or these podcasters or these big names, and it's a lot of money, because if you're going to draw them, it's a lot. But isn't that what's needed sometimes to get attention to podcasts? Because again, trying to make the similarity to TV streaming, it's you're only as good as your last big hit, right? What the podcast ends, serial story ends, and then people are like, "What's next?" And so you got to keep churning out all of this content. That's expensive. So, I mean, where do you put your money? On the big name that draws the eyeballs, or on the content with all these independent podcasters?
So I think it's not a world where it's either or, but it's investing in the right projects. So certain people like Smartless, celebrity podcast, very well done, good concept, it works. On the other hand, I could tell you how many celebrity moms started mom podcasts, celebrity moms who have like 990s and like, and if you had looked at like maybe what their reach would be and what they would do, it's not very good. It was like Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. They had no good ideas.
Yeah.
And they wanted to do zero work.
Right.
So giving them $20 million is ridiculous.
Yeah.
I can fund 1,000 podcasts with $20 million that are going to be much better. Yeah. But we do need that getting out there and having celebrities come in. But I think it became the thing where, like, especially during the pandemic, it was like, what am I going to do if I'm a celebrity? Oh, I can still do a podcast from my house. So I'll go do one, good or bad. And it's, eventually you have to get rid of the bad and just keep the good.
The joke is everybody has a podcast, right?
Just like everybody had a blog. Yeah. Remember back in the day, everyone had a blog. Now everyone has a podcast. What, for people that don't have a podcast, I've heard that like a startling statistic that everyone starts a podcast, but it ends after, 14 episodes or something very quick. Like people don't sustain it.
Yeah.
Yeah. We call that pod fade.
Yeah.
And it's, the thing is, when I worked in radio in New York, I had a sports show. And when we would try athletes out to come on the morning show, we'd make them do it for a month before we'd hire them. Because after a month, they'd go, this is a job. I got to get up every day.
Yeah.
This is not as, I thought we'd just come in and hang out and talk. No, there's prep. There's a lot of prep
work.
that just going to make us sound like we're not doing any prep.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Him and I know this very, very well. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I know, Nikki. And the fact is that when, people start podcasts, often they have an idea, but it's not flushed out. They don't. And the thing is, not everybody's good at this.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that, like, I hate about when people talk about podcasting, they're like, they always think of the crappy guy next door that does a really crappy podcast, and they're like, oh, they think that's what it is. It's like, no. Those of us are kind of good at this, have done it a long time, and really built our skill set up. But again, the entry is so easy. Anybody can do a podcast. Anybody can publish a podcast. So that's where that pod fade comes in, where people get in and they're like, oh, I have to do this every week. Ugh, I don't want to do that.
I think that when we talk about podcasting, though, are there too many podcasting apps? I mean, is it spread out too much?
I think with the podcast listening apps, there are quite a few, and it is getting smaller. I mean, let's just be honest. It's either Apple or Spotify right now for people that are listening. Like 90+% that's where it's at. I mean, Stitcher right now was the 6th biggest listening app, and it only had 1.5% of the listening audience. So it's really going to those two places, and that's fine, because any of us can put our stuff on both of those platforms. So that's for me. I don't care where you listen or how you listen. I just want to make sure that you know about the podcast and that you hear one of our podcasts.
Where is podcasting going, in your opinion? I mean, is it still a free for all where you could put a podcast up about anything and anything is going to work? Or, I mean, do you see big changes within this medium?
So the podcasts right now that are like doing well and making money are very niche focused. So, and very good at that. So, the more niche it is and the more focused it is, because, we've been trying to have advertisers understand, like a radio station will tell you they reach 10 million people. Really? Well, there's about 1,000 people that tell you that get the books. So with us, our numbers are real. So I tell you, I have 10,000 people that love CrossFit. That's a valuable set of people for somebody that's making CrossFit stuff. So that niche stuff is doing well and will continue to do well. And I just think for a lot of us that are independent podcast producers now, that, we've always been able to make really great podcasts at smaller budgets. And this is a good thing for us because all these companies now are starting to outsource and get into that. I think that it's still a very, we're not losing listeners. That's one thing I have to tell everybody. Like, there's no listeners going away. It's just Spotify's getting rid of some shows, but listeners are still there. They're still growing. We still haven't saturated the market. We're still barely out of the silent movie phase as far as podcasting goes.
I was just looking at our podcast numbers, and it doesn't say, I think Apple is where people listen to us the most on our podcast, although Google, people listen on the Google podcast as well. But one of the things I think is cool, Matty, is how you can have listeners around the world on podcasts. We have, most of our listeners are from the United States, but our top 4 countries are Turkey. We have 9 listeners in France. We have several listeners in the United Kingdom. So, I mean, it's kind of, it takes what you're talking about and puts it on a global platform.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. One of my podcasts, Deep Cover, The Real Donnie Brasco, we're top 10 in film podcasts in Great Britain. We always have been. That's just a great market for us and as well. And then, I have a podcast that's got a girl called Sloan Weinstein, and it's called Sloan Knows. She's 15 years old. She talks to NBA players. Huge in Singapore and in Asia. Like, they love the NBA. So we have a lot of listeners there. And that is one of the things that I love about this medium, because at the end of the day, I have this thing I call the 3 E's. It's all about empathy, education, and entertainment. If we're doing all 3 of those things right, we're doing a good job. I mean, because we're storytellers, all of us that especially that we're in radio, like we like to tell stories, and this gives us an opportunity to do that, even if we're not hired by one of the big companies anymore.
Right. What advice do you have to give to people, the many people probably out there listening to us that want to start a podcast? How do they find their niche? Because that's what you were just saying, is you really need to niche down, or you can't be a show for everybody, right?
No. So the first thing I always tell everybody is you have to do something that you're passionate about and you're educated on. If you're not good at talking about something, don't do that. And then, the second thing I have people do is a persona. So who's your ideal listener? Who's the one? And we know this from radio. I used to keep a picture when I worked at Alice of a lady named Kate who lived in Marin, and she had a Volvo station wagon, and she had 2 kids, and they were in soccer. Like, I knew Kate very well. And then create content around that. That's what I always tell, that's what I coach, shows on, to do that, because, if you don't know who you're talking to and you don't know what you're talking about, you're not going to succeed at this. It's just not going to work.
Yeah. Is there a sweet spot on length?
35 minutes.
Really? 35 minutes?
That's the industry standard for the good length for a podcast. Anything over 40, 45, you start losing listeners. And the number one thing that I look at, and I'm going to nerd out here, is completion rates. So if I have a podcast and I have over 70% completion rate, I know it's good content. If it's not getting listeners, it just means I'm not promoting it right. So that's kind of how, we gauge. And when I consult for folks and look at their podcasts, and I see a completion rate that's low, it's like, well, we need to work on the content first before you promote it. That's not going to work.
Yeah. It's interesting because I've been looking at it a different way, in that I've been looking at it in the radio way. So if people don't watch or listen to the whole show, that's okay, because the average amount of numbers people listen is about 59 minutes. So they're listening to an hour of it, and then a whole new, crew of people come and maybe listen to the second hour. Or but maybe I'm thinking about it the wrong way.
You're thinking about radio, where it's not on demand. So when it's on demand, I can complete a full show if it's 2 hours over a course of a week.
Right.
And that's where that comes in. And I don't mean to be nerdy metrics with it.
No, we love it. We love it.
Yeah. Sometimes I think about, like, I used to do dick jokes in New York City with Opie and Anthony. I went from that to, like, now I'm worried about metrics and numbers and all that stuff. Like, what happened to you?
Oh, no. We love it.
So
Go ahead.
Nikki wanted to ask advice for people that wanted to start a podcast, but I want to ask advice for us. How do you reach people and let them know that you're doing what you're doing?
Yeah.
Because it's different than radio where we didn't have to worry about marketing. There was a marketing department, there was a promotions team. People were going to listen to KGO and we never had to think about it. But now we have to think about it. And if we want to keep doing what we're doing and be successful, we have to let people know where we are. And I'm not sure how to do that.
So it gets back to what I was saying about the persona. So here's Kate. So where does Kate live? Like mentally, where is she online? What does she do? What does she consume? So I need to make sure that wherever she's consuming, we can somehow get our message there. And I tell anybody who's getting into podcasting now, if you don't have a paid promotion strategy, it's not going to work. Mm-hmm. Social media is not a great draw for podcast listening. In fact, 90% of our listening comes from people finding us on search in Google. So my other big thing for everybody is like your SEO needs to be solid. So if you don't have an SEO checker when you do your notes and all of that, get one, because that is it. Because you want somebody to be able to search and go, Stitcher went down, Stitcher's closing. And then Nikki's show comes up because we talked about it today. We SEO'd it right and all of that. And that's like the nerdy, but still important part of all of this. And now we have AI tools that help with all of that stuff. And I mean, it's really, there's, just so many resources, but again, there's so many out there, you don't know what to find, which is why I created a new app that's coming out in fall, which is called Poddle, which is going to be connecting podcast service providers and creators together so that they can start, sharing and learning and hiring each other. So
you brought up AI. How much of an influence do you think AI is going to have in the future on podcasting, broadcasting, all of it?
It's huge. I use AI every single day. I don't write anything that I don't run through AI afterwards because I'm a writer. I have a degree in creative writing. I've written my whole life. Damn, I hate it. It's really good. And it really helps out. So on the writing side, we're using it. Pretty much every podcast company is using this to help with their show notes and putting things together, because it's a lot quicker than having somebody sit and manually type out show notes. So that's one part that's there. The other part that I think is going to be exciting is like generating music and sound scores for podcasts without having to have a music designer do that. That's coming. AI is, we're using AI for video. In fact, we have an AI tool that we use for TikTok creation from our podcast. It takes a 30-minute podcast and then picks out 3 perfect clips for TikTok, puts video around it. And man, it's better than anything my team could do in 2 weeks, which again, it's sad because it probably taking a job or two away, but at the same time, for those of us, we need to run under lower budgets. This is what we have to do.
There was a DJ, was it Portland? There was an AI DJ that was going to do
radio continuously baffles me.
Thank you. So you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, I don't get it.
Commercials and be effing local. That's it. Do live reads. Don't do the other commercials. Be local. Done deal. Radio would be fine again. Not fine again, but it'd be better.
Right.
But no, radio is just consistently like, it really upsets me. It's my heart and soul, but it's like, let's keep doing the same text promos and let's say the same things at every break. And
yeah. I know, I don't miss that part of it. Yeah. But yeah, when I saw that headline about that AI DJ and then she's promoting it, and I'm like, you're talking yourself out of a job. AI Ashley, thank you. And I'm like, you're talking yourself out of a job. If they can figure out and make AI Ashley more popular than real Ashley, bye. Goodbye.
Sayonara, sucker.
But I mean that's happening. That's happened anyway. I have friends at iHeart. I was the head of podcast there for a bit, and they do 12 to 13 different markets a day.
Yeah.
I mean,
you can't be local like that though. You know what I mean? Like you can't do local San Francisco and Portland and Austin. And I don't get it. And it makes me sad.
Yeah. There's a reason why Alice is still doing quite well with Sarah, because Sarah's a mainstay local.
Right.
They let her talk. They let her talk.
Let her be her.
And that went away for almost every other show. I mean, there's only a handful of shows in the country that I work with that are still doing good radio, as far as I'm concerned, as far as like, fun stuff, spontaneous stuff. not bits, not canned actors calling in pretending that they're,
Yeah,
doing
there's Sally from
Ryan
wherever.
George's,
Yeah, exactly. What do you think about Live 105 coming back?
Well, I mean, that call sign is near and dear to my heart. I did mornings
Right.
there with No Name, and I remember, I mean, that was the old KME
KMU?
from San Jose. Everybody came from
Yeah.
that. And that was just a legendary station. I worked at
Yeah.
WNEW in New York, which is pretty much the legendary rock station on the East Coast. But when I came out and then, finally had an opportunity to work at that station, I took it because it was just like, it's so legendary.
Right.
I hope they don't F it up, but we'll see what happens. But I'm glad it's back. I mean, it was again, these big companies that bought these stations, they're in other places. They don't understand the markets. They don't understand how important those local call letters are to people, and how, you think Live 105, you think rock, you think alt, you think, I mean, that's it. So
Yeah.
I'm glad, but
I still miss KSJO too, but that's because I'm down here in San Jose. So
yeah, KSJO, yeah.
I miss it, but yeah, I love having you on because obviously you have a long career in not just podcasting, but in media. And it's scary sometimes to think about where media is going, who's taking it over. We saw in the comments, people talking about talk radio. It's very conservative. Obviously we host a very liberal show, and I lead with it. I don't hide that at all. Do you think that there's going to be an end to traditional radio? Electric cars getting rid of AM radio, even though they're trying to fight that in Washington. I mean, is there going to come a day where you're just not going to? It's going to be all podcasting. It's going to be all through your phone. There's not going to be a traditional AM FM.
I do not see AM lasting in 10 years because the people that are listening to it are dying, and that's it. They're all older folks. A young person would. So I teach at the Academy of Art University. So I've been teaching for 12 years. So when I first started my class, I would ask how many people listen to radio, and maybe like a third of the class did, and then podcasting a third. Now 100% podcast. The other none of them listen to radio. They wouldn't even think of it like commercials. Like, why would they listen to 9 minutes of commercials? So unless radio really changes everything, I don't think it'll ever go away because that local quality sports, things like that. But I do think it will all shift to FM, and it's all going to shift to streaming because, at iHeart, that was one of the things we kind of did right, was that, we made all of our shows streaming, all of our shows available on podcasts, because at the end of the day, I just want you to get the content and get into the show. It doesn't matter how you listen. And that's something that's, as sales end of things, they learn to sell all of it instead of just focusing on the radio. It'll still be around. It's just going to be in a different form.
Well, Matty Staudt, Jam Street Media, where can people find you? Where can they find your podcasts?
At Matty Staudt on everything. And then if you go to jamstreetmedia.com, you can check out a couple of the shows that we have going right now. So thanks.
Perfect. Well,